Welcome to my channel on Bible topics. But if you don't believe in the Bible and you're just curious about Bible topics, whether you are an atheist, agnostic, Muslim, Buddhist, the list goes on and on. I welcome you to stay, listen to the Bible topics, because one thing the Bible does have going for it, at least with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bible is basically thousands of years old. So it's been around for, in human years, a long time. Our topic for today is Abraham's nightmare. Abraham's nightmare, but no one ever called it the nightmare. They just say Abraham's dream. But usually when we have a dream, it's something pleasant. Abraham had something that was terrified him, that scared him to death. So I call it Abraham's nightmare. Usually people misconstrue it and twist it up. They twist it up, but they don't go deep into it, whether the prophecy is a recent prophecy or a future prophecy. But I'm going to try to shed some light on it, and we're going to see if it pertains to the past Israelites in Egypt or it's occurring something in the future. Let's jump right in. Alright, we're going from Genesis chapter 15, verse 12 to verse 12 to 16. Here we go. Let me get my little stuff set up first. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick, dreadful, like I said, a nightmare, dreadful darkness came over him. So it is a nightmare, a dreadful, terrifying, fearful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, now God speaking here, so you can put that in quotation marks. You see that? Quotation marks, God talking. Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers, and underline that, see, strangers in a country not their own. And they will be enslaved, okay, we heard that many times before, enslaved and mistreated there. Now, here comes the good part. God said, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves. So they're going to be slaves for a long time. And afterward, they will come out with great possessions. That did occur. They will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here. So it said, in the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here. For the sin of the Amorites has not reached its full measure. Alright, so let's see what we can learn from all of this. Let's see. We know that his descendants will be strangers strangers in some country. Because it's a country, so we don't know the country. Oh, and that's we don't know the country in a country, and it's not their own. So let's see what we can get from this meaning. All right, this coming from now. I went to YouTube, like all of us do, to get a definition for strange. The word strange is an adjective that describes something that is unusual or surprising in a way that is unsettling. So that's the main thing. It's unsettling. It don't make you feel good or hard to understand. It can also mean something that is not previously visited. So you didn't previously visit it, not seen or encountered, unaccustomed to or unfamiliar with. So that's what we got for strange. And we'll keep coming back to that definition. So strange, unsettling, hard to understand, unusual or surprising, not previously visited or seen or encountered, unaccustomed to or unfamiliar with. That's what we got from our internet definition of the word strange. So I'm back. I'm going right back to Genesis 15. So, when they go to that land and they're strange, and they're strangers, it's unsettling for them. It's uncomfortable. They don't know no one there. They know no one. Strangers, unsettling, unseen. They don't know nothing about the land. That's what the definition says to me. They don't know nothing about the land that they are strangers in. That's what it means to be a stranger. The simple definition for a stranger: you are completely unfamiliar with the territory. So keep that in mind, the definition of a stranger. Unfamiliar, in the simplest terms. Unfamiliar with the terrain or the territory. So let's keep jumping on. This comes from Genesis chapter 39, verse, 1 to 6. I'll say that because it's cut off. So now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. We all know that. But I can stop right there. To the Israelites, to the Hebrew people, Egypt was not strange to them. We heard many times in the Bible, Abraham went to Egypt. Abraham stayed in Egypt. They were so comfortable with Egypt that the Egyptian Pharaoh saw Sarah and wanted to make her his wife. So Abraham and his people, Egypt was not strange. So most people keep saying the land is Egypt where there was a slave in. So could it really be Egypt? The Hebrews know about Egypt. So Egypt, Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. So he was comfortable. It was not unsettling for him. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. So Joseph was not unfamiliar with Egyptians. The Egyptians did not startle him. The Hebrews were not strangers to the land of Egypt. They wasn't strangers. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. So even Potiphar was familiar with Hebrews. He was familiar because he put Joseph in charge of his whole house. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and the field. So we see Joseph worked for an Egyptian. Joseph knew how to talk to the Egyptian if he was head of the household. So Joseph was not a stranger to the Egyptians. He knew how to communicate with them. That's not a stranger, because remember, a stranger is unsettling, unseen. It throw you off your base. So he's not a stranger in Egypt. Let's keep moving. So we right back to where we started, to Genesis chapter 15, because I'm going to keep going back. So we already saw, know for certain that for 400 years, your descendants will be strangers. And technically we can say, God said your descendants. So that includes Joseph. So the time of their captivity started with Joseph because Joseph was a slave. of the Egyptians, will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated. We already saw that didn't work out because Joseph, he was enslaved, but he was treated well. He was not disrespected. Joseph in the land of Egypt, he was enslaved, but he was not mistreated. He was not starving. He was not whipped. So, can this prophecy be talking about the Hebrews in Moses' period? Know for certain that for 400 years, your descendants, it started with Joseph. Now remember, it started with Joseph, will be strangers in a country not their own. He was not no stranger there. He knew the Egyptians. He knew how to communicate. In fact, even Joseph's brothers, his brothers, remember, they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and the Ishmaelites knew how to talk to the Egyptians. So all the Hebrews, because Abraham, he knew how to talk to the Egyptians. He knew the language. Abraham knew the language, so his children knew how to communicate. So Egypt was not no strange land to them, and a country not their own. And they will be enslaved, and we're going to see that part of the country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. So let's keep seeing what the Bible has to say. Let's keep seeing. All right, this is Genesis chapter 41, verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, see, Joseph knows the Egyptian language. He's not no stranger there. A stranger, you go to a strange land, you don't know the language. You go to the strange land, you don't know how to get around. Joseph knew the language, he knew how to get around. The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. So, we see, like I said, Joseph, a Hebrew, is able to communicate with Pharaoh easily. He does not seem like he's terrified of the Egyptians. He's not asking, where am I? Who are you? He's not asking none of that. He knows exactly where he is. But he's a slave, so he can't go back to his father's house because the Egyptians own him. He can't run away. Now, so back to Genesis 15. As I keep saying right now, know for certain that for 400 years, starting with Joseph, your descendants will be strangers. Did it seem like Joseph was a stranger in the land of Egypt, in a country not their own? Now, it was not his country, but you remember at that time, during Joseph, they didn't have no country. So we can't even say not their country, because they didn't have no country. The Hebrews during Joseph, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they had no country. Or Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, they had no country. So they was vagabonds. And they were being enslaved. Joseph was enslaved and mistreated. But he was not mistreated. He was treated well by Potiphar and by Pharaoh. Joseph was not mistreated. Joseph was not a stranger to the Egyptians. So Joseph represented all he, and so that means his brothers, because remember Joseph was one of the youngest brothers. So his brothers and his father, because I said Abraham knew the Egyptians. So Egypt is not a strange land. It's not. So what is God talking about here? All right, now we jump into Genesis 47. Now, let's still dealing with Joseph era. The era of Joseph. Now, the Israelites settled. They settled in Egypt. See, now, they was not forced. Because remember, when you a slave and mistreated, when you're a slave, like Joseph was in the beginning, you forced. And it said the Israelites. The Israelites. So that's, and I think at the time it was like 70 of them. And then after Joseph, when Joseph was there in Egypt for a while, their population ballooned. And let me finish reading. Then the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They chose to live in Goshen. Or Pharaoh gave it to them. They acquire property. Okay, when you're a slave, you don't get no property there. And were fruitful when you're a slave and increase. But now, if you're a slave, you can be fruitful and increase. You can do that as a slave. But the Israelites, they chose that they settled. No one forced them. In the region of Goshen, they chose to settle in Goshen. I think Pharaoh gave it to them. And when you're a slave, you're not given anything. They acquire property. Okay, so they bought property in Egypt during the beginning, before Pharaoh decided to make them slaves, because they kept increasing so much. Because in the beginning, remember God said for 400 years, and the 400 years started with Joseph. So there was a period of time when the Israelites were not slaves in Egypt. They were not slaves in Egypt. Because right here it says, now the Israelites, they settled. They could have went back to where Abraham was. I forgot Canaan, wherever he came from. They could have went right back there where Jacob was, Canaan, another day. But they decided to stay in Egypt. In the region of Goshen, they acquired property. Slaves don't buy, and I don't care, all throughout human history, slaves, from what I gather, do not buy property. They don't do that. So, who can the 400 years really be talking about? Who? Let's keep going, good people. Now, I did a definition for the word settled. To place as to stay. So they decided to stay in Egypt. No one made them. If you read further, because Pharaoh talked to them, no one made all the Israelites stay. They decided to stay in Egypt. To establish in residence. See, remember, they decided to live in Egypt. There was not no slaves during Joseph's time. To be furnished with inhabitants. They chose to inhabit Egypt. And the Egyptians don't welcome them because of what Joseph was doing for them. To cause to pack down, to live there. They decided to pack down. To clarify by causing dregs or impurity to sink something else. To make quiet or orderly. So orderly, they decided to stay there. Remember, settle. To place so as to stay. To establish a residence. To furnish with inhabitants. Because remember, when they stayed in Egypt, they made the population grow. So, were they slaves? They were, at this time, were they slaves or not? So we come right back again to Genesis 15. We know about the word strangers. I went over that. A country not their own. So we just now saw in a previous discussion in Genesis, they decided to stay in Egypt. They decided to get property. They decided to acquire property. They decided to go live in the land of Goshen. They decided. And they were being enslaved. They was not slaves. They wasn't enslaved when they did that. Nor were they mistreated. So does the prophecy really apply to the Hebrews that were in Egypt? They became slaves, They did become slaves. But were they truly, they lived in Egypt for 400 years. But were they slaves the entire 400? Because God said, then the Lord said to them, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers. So not when Joseph started, that started the 400 years right there. But God said for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. And they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. So technically, the people of Hebrew, they probably was in Egypt for about 300 years. Because I'm going to do the math later. I'm going to do the math. But they were not enslaved in the beginning. And they were not mistreated. They was treated with great respect by the Egyptians in the beginning. But God said, for 400 years you will be slaves from the start. They did not start off as no slaves. But God said for 400 years, soon as you get to that land, you will be a slave. You will be mistreated as soon as you get to that land. Let's jump on. So this comes from Genesis chapter 50, verse 22 to 26. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived, okay, here we go here. He lived to be 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, so he lived a good while. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land. So he said, God want to come when he's ready, and God will visit you, and he's going to bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. But Joseph never said, my people will be slaves. He never said, my people will be mistreated. Joseph never said that. Joseph said, God will visit you. That's something pleasant. A visit is pleasant. And bring you up out of this land to the land he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph never once said the Hebrews will become slaves. He never said they were strangers. That never came out of his mouth. He never said the Israelites were strangers in Egypt. He never said that. He never said they will be mistreated or enslaved. That never came out of Joseph's mouth. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. So we see Joseph never said anything harmful about his people. He never said you will be mistreated, and he never said we are strangers here. Never out of his mouth. He never said we are strangers in Egypt, as God said to Abraham. So does the prophecy apply to them? He did say God going to bring up out of here, but he didn't say God going to deliver you from slavery. He never said that. Let's keep going. So we are back to Genesis 15. Like I said, we know the Hebrews during Joseph's reign time was not enslaved. We know that during Joseph's time they were not mistreated there. So we know that. And we know through Joseph's time they were not strangers in a country not their own. Because they started, when the Hebrews started having children in Egypt, they did start thinking of Egypt as their country. Because you remember, when we saw with Moses and them, they kept wanting to go back to Egypt. So Egypt, in their mind, was their home. They wanted to go back. They never said the people was complaining about Moses in the desert, in the wilderness, in the desert. They never said Egypt is not our country. They never said that. So what is God talking about? Then or something in the future? Let's keep going. Now, This is Exodus 2. Oh, now I want to say this too, but I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait. Exodus 2, verse 5 down to let me see. I'll say 10 or maybe 8. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then her sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Okay, so now we see again. When the child grew older, she took him, and he became her son. She named him Moses, so Moses is an Egyptian name. Moses is not no Hebrew name. It is an Egyptian name. She said, I'm going to name him Moses. So, let's continue with our tale so we know about Moses. Moses, like I said earlier, the Hebrews were not strangers in Egypt. The young woman, the Egyptian, took Moses. She didn't say Moses wasn't a stranger to her. The Hebrews were not a stranger to her. She knew the Hebrew people. So, back to Genesis 15. Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants were strangers. That baby was not, for 400 years, no for certain that your descendants will be strangers. To that woman, that baby was not a stranger, in a country not their own. She took him as her own son. So the country was like his country. They were being enslaved. She did not put that baby into no slavery. Mistreated there. That baby was not mistreated. He became her son. So, is Genesis 15 talking about the Israelites during Moses' time? Or is Genesis 15 a future event? It can cover both. They could overlap. The first Exodus, it could overlap. But we see so far that there was not strangers in that land, and they were not enslaved, and they was not mistreated. We saw with Joseph and the descendants that many Israelites lived in Egypt. Many of them. Let's keep moving. This is Exodus 2. One day after Moses had grown up, remember, he was under the care of that Egyptian woman. I heard that she was royalty. He went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. Now it has begun. So I said, eventually the Egyptians said, they starting to multiply so quick, we better do something before they join our enemy. But before, the Hebrews were their friend. Watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. See, now the Egyptians are taking advantage of the Hebrews because he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people, looking this way and that and seeing no one. He killed the Egyptian and hid her in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your brother, your Hebrew? Then he gave Moses a smart reply. Who are you to tell us what to do? You killed that Egyptian. And Moses, if you read the story, That's when he said, I better get out of here before the Egyptians kill me, because I think the Egyptians was hard on if he killed another Egyptian. So Moses, he got to get out of Dodge. So, now, Exodus 12, verse 40. Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 400 years. So that means the Israelites lived in Egypt for 400 years. But I can subtract how long Joseph was there. Oops. Let me see. Okay, it's hard to draw with his mouth. 430. I'll say Joseph, because I'm going to include, I'm just going to say 60 years of peace. I'll say that. 60 years of peace. So I'll say 60 years of peace. You do subtraction. That's 0. This is 7. This 3. So technically, we can estimate that they was there for roughly, using my simple 60-year period of peace, they had roughly 300. They was there for roughly 370 years as slaves. First 60 years peace, 370 years slaves. But God said you're going to be there for. Remember, I'm giving a nice estimate, because remember Joseph lived to be 110. He could have started working for Pharaoh when he was in his 30s or 40. And 110 plus 40, that's like 70 years. If Joseph was 40 working for Pharaoh, so they had roughly 300 years. They was roughly slaves for 370 years. I'm just estimating, but that's not 400, because God said 400. So technically, you can say roughly 370 years they were slaves, not 400 years. All right, let's move on. So we back to Genesis. So we know for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. But remember, they was there for roughly 300 years. 370 years of slaves. They will be enslaved. Now, at the end of Joseph's reign, they were enslaved. At the end of Joseph's peace, they was mistreated there. But even then, there was never a stranger in a country not their own. There was never a stranger. Remember, they was born in Egypt. Like here in the United States. If a foreigner come here and conceive a child, the child is a citizen of the United States. So those Israelites, they was born in Egypt. So it was not a strange country to them. Strangers in a country not their own. It became their country. So Egypt became their country. So is this prophecy really talking about them or another group of people who has identical? Now I'm not going to say the people. There's another group of people in the Western world who share the same fates like the Israelites. And they truly was enslaved for over 400 years. Truly, not 370. They was truly enslaved for over 400 years. And that country, they were truly strangers. When they got to that country, when they was brought there in ships, they was truly strangers in the country, and it truly was not their own. The Hebrews, they was born there. They chose, remember, because Jacob or Israel, he walked to Egypt to go see his son Joseph. No one forced the Hebrews, the Israelites, to go to Egypt. So there was never strangers there. Never. Never strangers there. Because they decided to walk there. You're only a stranger when you don't decide to go there. When somebody drag you there. Like the people who was dragged around the globe. And those centuries, I don't want to name, but it was a group of people who was forced from their homeland. They became truly strangers in that new land. And the land was not their own. Even to this very day, even though they're born here, their ancestors never chose to get there. So the land is truly not their land. They may feel comfortable in the land, but from a God point of view, even the descendants of the people who was forced here, their descendants is still not their land. Let's keep going, people. So, I think that's it, good people. Thank you for stopping by. It's your decision to make. Did that prophecy pertain to the Israelites then? Because there are some similarities with it. Near the end of when Joseph died, that's when things would start to go down here. But I said there was never strangers in Egypt. Never strangers. And that's the first thing God said. That's what he said. Know for certain that for 400 years, your descendants will be strangers. That's the first thing he said. That's the first thing he said. And the Hebrews, the Israelites, they was never, ever strangers in Egypt. Never. The people who the Western world scattered all over the place, they were strangers in the country they was taken to. They were truly strangers. Heavenly Father, thank you for this lesson. I hope this lesson give insight to me and to the listeners about was the prophecy or was the image you showed to Abraham truly fulfilled and done. Thank you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for stopping by to visit this lesson. Until the next time, dear listener, peace.